June 5, 1944. Convoy College, Luzon Strait, Philippines. 3 American submarines broke the surface simultaneously in the pre-dawn darkness, their periscopes barely visible above the black waters. USS Shark, USS Pintado, and USS Pilotfish had been stalking their prey for 18 hours, coordinating their movements through coded radio transmissions that the Japanese could not decipher. Below them, sleeping in their bunks, were the crews of 8 Japanese merchant ships carrying vital supplies to the Philippines. By sunrise, every single one of those ships would be on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, victims of the most devastating submarine wolfpack attack in naval history. This is the story of how 3 American submarines perfected a tactic the Germans had pioneered, turned it against the Japanese Empire, and in a single night of precision carnage, proved that the United States Navy had mastered the art of coordinated underwater warfare. What happened in the waters off Luzon would shock Japanese naval commanders, terrify merchant captains throughout the Pacific, and demonstrate that American wolf packs had become the most lethal hunting force on the planet. To understand why this attack represented such a revolutionary moment in naval warfare, you must first understand how desperately the Japanese needed those 8 ships, and why American submarines had struggled for years to achieve the level of coordination that made such devastation possible. The story begins not with heroics, but with failure, miscommunication, and a naval doctrine that had to be completely rebuilt in the face of an enemy that refused to die easily. When the United States entered World War II, American submarine doctrine emphasized individual patrol operations. Each submarine received orders to patrol a specific area of ocean, hunt independently, and avoid contact with other American submarines to prevent friendly fire incidents. This approach reflected peacetime training that stressed caution, conservation of resources, and minimal risk to expensive vessels and highly trained crews. The doctrine made sense for a peacetime Navy operating in familiar waters with established communication networks and nearby support bases. It made no sense whatsoever for wartime operations across the vast Pacific Ocean, where Japanese convoys moved unpredictably through thousands of square miles of open water, protected by increasingly sophisticated escort forces that had learned to counter individual submarine attacks. By 1943, American submarine commanders were reporting frustrating encounters where single submarines found large Japanese convoys but could only attack a fraction of the available targets before escorts drove them away. Submarine after submarine returned to base with stories of convoys that escaped because one boat simply could not overwhelm the defenses and sink enough ships to justify the tactical risk. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commanding the Pacific Submarine Force, recognized that something had to change. The Germans had developed wolf pack tactics that were devastating Allied shipping in the Atlantic. Karl Dunitz's coordinated submarine attacks had nearly brought Britain to its knees through systematic destruction of merchant convoys. If German submarines could coordinate attacks against heavily defended Allied convoys, why couldn't American submarines do the same against Japanese shipping? The problem was that American submarine doctrine had no framework for coordinated attacks. Submarine commanders were trained to operate independently, to avoid radio communications that might reveal their positions, and to maintain radio silence except for emergency situations. The idea of multiple submarines working together, communicating regularly, and coordinating simultaneous attacks violated every principle of submarine warfare that the Navy had taught for decades. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. Japanese merchant shipping was becoming increasingly organized into well-defended convoys, escorted by destroyers, frigates, and aircraft. Individual submarine attacks were becoming less effective as Japanese anti-submarine warfare improved. American submarines needed a force multiplier that would allow them to overwhelm convoy defenses and inflict crippling losses on Japanese shipping. Captain Charles Momsen, known throughout the submarine force as Swede, was tasked with developing American wolf pack doctrine. Momsen was a natural choice for the assignment. He had served aboard German submarines as an observer during the 1920s, understood European submarine tactics, and possessed the innovative thinking necessary to adapt foreign concepts to American conditions and equipment. Working with Captain John Brown, Mommsen spent months analyzing German Wolfpack operations, identifying successful tactics, and determining how to modify those tactics for Pacific conditions. The Germans coordinated their wolf packs through extensive radio communications with land-based command centers. This approach worked in the relatively confined waters of the Atlantic, where submarines could maintain contact with headquarters and receive detailed instructions for approaching and attacking convoys. The Pacific presented completely different challenges. Distances were enormous. Radio communications over thousands of miles were unreliable. American submarines often operated beyond the range of effective command and control from Pearl Harbor or other bases. Most importantly, Japanese convoys were typically much smaller than the massive Allied convoys in the Atlantic, usually consisting of 5 to 10 ships rather than the 100-ship formations that German submarines attacked. After extensive analysis and wargaming, Mommsen and Brown concluded that American Wolfpacks should consist of 3 submarines rather than the dozen or more submarines that Germans used. 3 boats could maintain effective coordination through short-range radio communications, could be controlled by the senior submarine commander rather than distant headquarters, and could overwhelm the typically small Japanese convoys without requiring complex tactical coordination. The 3-submarine formation would consist of 2 flankers and 1 trailer. The flankers would position themselves on either side of a detected convoy, maneuvering to attack from different angles simultaneously. The trailer would follow the convoy, maintaining contact, reporting course and speed changes, and joining the attack when the flankers were in position. This arrangement meant that when the attack began, the convoy would face torpedo launches from 3 different directions, making evasive maneuvers impossible and overwhelming escort defenses. On October 1, 1943, Captain Mommsen led the first American Wolfpack into combat. USS Cerro, USS Shad, and USS Grayback departed Midway Island as Coordinated Attack Group 1, officially designated but known to every submariner in the Pacific as America's first Wolfpack. The experimental patrol achieved mixed results. The submarines successfully coordinated their movements and maintained communication, but failed to locate any significant Japanese convoys during their patrol period. Subsequent Wolfpack operations gradually improved as submarine commanders learned to work together, developed effective communication procedures, and refined their attack tactics. By early 1944, American Wolfpacks were achieving consistent success against Japanese convoys, sinking more ships per patrol than individual submarines operating alone. The breakthrough came when Admiral Lockwood authorized Wolfpack commanders to give their formations nicknames that reflected their aggressive spirit and fostered unit cohesion. Blair's Blasters, Park's Pirates, Ben's Busters, Whitey's Wolves. These colorful names created an esprit de corps that transcended individual submarine crews and welded 3 boat formations into unified hunting teams. Captain Leon Blair commanded the Wolfpack that would achieve the most devastating single-night convoy attack of the Pacific War. Blair was an unusual choice to lead a Wolfpack. He had joined the Navy after serving in the Army during World War I, graduated from the Naval Academy in 1923, and spent 20 years serving on surface ships and older submarines before taking command of submarine divisions at Pearl Harbor in 1943. When Blair was selected to lead Coordinated Attack Group 6, he had never been on a war patrol. His 3 submarine commanders were all first-time captains leading their boats on maiden war patrols. USS Shark was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Edward Blakely. USS Pintado was led by Lieutenant Commander Bernard Clary. USS Pilotfish was under Lieutenant Commander Robert Close. None of these men had experience with Wolfpack operations. They would learn through trial by fire in some of the most dangerous waters in the Pacific. Blair's Blasters departed Pearl Harbor on May 16, 1944, bound for the area American submarines called Convoy College. This was the stretch of ocean between Luzon and Formosa, where Japanese merchant shipping concentrated before dispersing to destinations throughout the South Pacific. Japanese convoys in this area carried everything the empire needed to continue fighting: oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Indochina, troops and supplies for the Philippines, raw materials for Japanese war production. American intelligence, based on intercepted Japanese communications, indicated that Convoy College would be extremely active during June 1944. Japanese forces were preparing for the decisive battle they expected when American forces invaded the Marianas. Massive quantities of supplies were moving through the Luzon Strait as Japan reinforced its Pacific garrisons and stockpiled materials for the coming confrontation. Blair's blasters spent 3 weeks in Convoy College without locating any significant targets. The submarines practiced coordination, refined their communication procedures, and learned to work together as a team. But the empty ocean provided no opportunities to test their wolf-pack tactics against enemy shipping. By early June, Blair was beginning to wonder if his inexperienced pack would return to Pearl Harbor without firing a single torpedo. Everything changed on the night of June 5, 1944. USS Shark, operating as the northernmost flanker, detected radar contacts bearing southwest at 23 miles range. Initial analysis suggested a convoy of at least 8 ships with multiple escorts. Radio communications between the 3 submarines confirmed that this was the target they had been hunting for weeks. Blair's tactical plan was elegant in its simplicity. USS Shark would shadow the convoy from the north, reporting course and speed changes while the other 2 submarines maneuvered into attack positions. USS Pintado would conduct an end-around maneuver, racing ahead of the convoy at maximum surface speed to position itself for a frontal attack. USS Pilotfish would approach from the south, timing its approach to arrive simultaneously with Pintado's attack. The coordination required split-second timing and perfect communication between submarines operating in radio silence. Any mistake in navigation, timing, or communication could result in submarines attacking each other instead of the enemy convoy. The margin for error was essentially zero. At 0130 hours, June 6, 1944, USS Pintado reached its attack position 4 miles ahead of the oncoming convoy. Lieutenant Commander Clary could see the dark silhouettes of Japanese ships approaching through his periscope. 8 large merchant vessels in 2 columns, protected by 4 escort ships running along the convoy's flanks and ahead of the formation. USS Pilotfish simultaneously reached its attack position south of the convoy track. Lieutenant Commander Close counted the same 8 targets that Pintado had identified. The Japanese convoy was steaming directly into a perfectly coordinated trap. 2 American submarines were positioned to attack from opposite sides, while the third maintained surveillance and prepared to exploit any gaps in the convoy formation. At 0200 hours, both attacking submarines fired their opening salvos simultaneously. Pintado launched 6 torpedoes at the lead ships in the port column. Pilotfish fired 5 torpedoes at targets in the starboard column. 11 American torpedoes were running toward Japanese ships, approaching from different directions, making evasive maneuvers impossible. The first torpedo impacts occurred at 0204 hours. A massive tanker in the convoy's lead position erupted in flames as 2 torpedoes struck its port side amidships. The explosion was visible for miles, illuminating the entire convoy in orange light that revealed the positions of all 8 merchant ships to the attacking submarines. Before the Japanese could react to the first attack, more torpedoes found their targets. A large cargo ship loaded with military supplies exploded when a torpedo detonated its ammunition cargo. The blast was so powerful that windows shattered on nearby escort ships, and the shock wave damaged adjacent merchant vessels. As escort ships frantically began dropping depth charges and firing illumination rounds, USS Shark joined the attack from the north. Lieutenant Commander Blakely had maneuvered his submarine to attack the convoy's rear ships, which were now silhouetted against the fires burning on vessels hit in the initial assault. Within 30 minutes of the first torpedo launch, 6 of the 8 Japanese merchant ships were sinking or burning uncontrollably. The remaining 2 ships attempted to escape by breaking formation and steaming at maximum speed toward the coast of Luzon. But they had nowhere to hide. American submarines had achieved complete tactical surprise and maintained fire superiority throughout the engagement. USS Pintado pursued one of the escaping ships and sank it with a single torpedo at 02:45 hours. USS Pilotfish caught the final merchant vessel and sent it to the bottom at 03:15 hours. 8 ships sunk in less than 2 hours. Not a single Japanese merchant vessel escaped the Wolfpack attack. The destruction was so complete and so rapid that Japanese escort ships had no clear targets for counterattack. The 3 American submarines had approached from different directions, attacked simultaneously, and dispersed before escorts could organize effective anti-submarine measures. Depth charge attacks hit empty water while the submarines escaped at maximum speed. But the tactical success of the attack was only part of the story. The strategic implications of Blair's Blasters' Convoy massacre would reverberate throughout the Japanese merchant marine and fundamentally alter how Japan approached convoy protection for the remainder of the war. The 8 ships sunk by Blair's Blasters represented more than 90,000 tons of Japanese shipping. More importantly, they carried supplies that Japan desperately needed for the defense of the Philippines: military equipment, ammunition, fuel, food, and raw materials that would never reach their intended destinations. The loss of these supplies would weaken Japanese defenses precisely when American forces were preparing for major operations in the Central Pacific. Japanese naval intelligence analyzed the attack and reached disturbing conclusions about American submarine capabilities. The coordination demonstrated by the 3 American submarines indicated a level of tactical sophistication that Japanese anti-submarine forces were not prepared to counter. The simultaneous attacks from multiple directions suggested that American submarines could overwhelm even well-escorted convoys through superior coordination and communication. Most alarming for Japanese planners was the realization that if American submarines could coordinate such devastating attacks, no Japanese convoy was safe, regardless of its escort strength. The traditional response to submarine threats was to provide more escort ships and aircraft. But if 3 submarines could coordinate their attacks to overwhelm escort defenses, adding more escorts might not provide adequate protection. The Japanese response was to fundamentally alter their convoy routing and scheduling. Instead of running regular convoys along predictable routes, Japanese merchant shipping would operate on irregular schedules, along constantly changing routes. Convoys would be smaller, harder to detect, and would avoid areas where American submarines were known to concentrate. These changes represented a massive victory for American submarine forces. By forcing Japan to abandon efficient shipping schedules and regular convoy routes, Wolfpack attacks disrupted Japanese logistics even when they did not sink ships. Japanese merchant vessels spent more time in port waiting for favorable routing, traveled longer distances on circuitous routes, and operated at reduced efficiency throughout the transportation system. The success of Blair's Blasters validated Wolfpack doctrine and led to rapid expansion of coordinated attack group operations. Within 6 months of the Convoy College massacre, Admiral Lockwood had more than 20 Wolfpacks operating throughout the Pacific. Each pack consisted of 3 submarines, operated under colorful nicknames, and followed the tactical doctrine developed by Mommsen and Brown. The statistical results spoke for themselves. Detailed analysis conducted by Navy researchers showed that 3 submarine Wolfpacks could sink or damage 40% more ships than 3 submarines operating individually in the same area. The force multiplication effect of coordination was undeniable. 3 submarines working together were significantly more effective than 3 submarines working alone. But the psychological impact of Wolfpack operations extended far beyond statistical measures of effectiveness. Japanese merchant crews became increasingly reluctant to serve on ships operating in areas where American Wolfpacks were active. Shipping schedules became more erratic as convoy planners attempted to avoid known submarine concentrations. Insurance costs for Japanese merchant shipping increased dramatically as underwriters recognized the threat posed by coordinated submarine attacks. The most significant long-term impact was on Japanese naval strategy. Japan was forced to assign increasing numbers of escort ships and aircraft to convoy protection, reducing the forces available for offensive operations. By late 1944, Japan was deploying more naval resources to defend merchant shipping than to conduct offensive operations against American forces. This defensive reallocation represented a fundamental shift in Japanese naval strategy. The Imperial Navy had been designed and trained for decisive fleet engagements that would destroy American naval power through superior tactics and individual ship performance. Instead, Japanese naval forces found themselves tied down in defensive convoy escort duty, unable to concentrate for the decisive battles that Japanese doctrine emphasized. American wolf packs had achieved a strategic victory that extended far beyond the ships they sank. By forcing Japan to adopt defensive postures and dispersed operations, coordinated submarine attacks undermined Japanese naval effectiveness across all operational areas. Japan could not simultaneously protect its merchant shipping and maintain offensive naval operations against advancing American forces. The tactical innovations pioneered by Blair's blasters spread throughout the American submarine force and influenced submarine operations for the remainder of the war. Wolfpack communication procedures became standard throughout the Pacific Fleet. Coordination tactics developed in Convoy College were adopted by submarine forces operating from Australia to Alaska. Most importantly, the aggressive spirit and innovation demonstrated by American Wolfpack commanders became a model for submarine operations in all theaters. American submarines had proven that they could adapt enemy tactics, improve upon foreign innovations, and achieve results that exceeded anything accomplished by the originators of Wolfpack doctrine. By the end of 1944, American submarines had sunk more than 2.4 million tons of Japanese shipping, more than the previous 3 years combined. Wolfpack operations accounted for a significant portion of these losses and had effectively broken the back of Japanese merchant marine operations in the Central Pacific. The Japanese merchant fleet, which had numbered more than 6 million tons at the beginning of the war, had been reduced to less than 2 million tons by early 1945. Most remaining ships were concentrated in the Sea of Japan or other areas close to the Japanese home islands, unable to support military operations in the far Pacific due to the submarine threat. Blair's blasters had demonstrated that American submarines could master the art of coordinated warfare and apply it with devastating effectiveness against enemy shipping. The 8 ships sunk in Convoy College on June 6, 1944, represented more than a tactical victory. They represented the moment when American submarines proved they had become the most sophisticated and lethal submarine force in naval history. Captain Leon Blair was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership during the attack. His 3 submarine commanders received Silver Stars for their individual contributions to the Wolfpack's success. But the real recognition came from their fellow submariners, who understood that Blair's blasters had achieved something unprecedented in submarine warfare. The Wolfpack tactic that devastated Japanese shipping in Convoy College would be repeated hundreds of times throughout the Pacific as American submarines perfected the art of coordinated attack. Each success built upon the innovations and lessons learned from previous operations, creating an increasingly effective force that Japan simply could not counter. Japanese merchant shipping never recovered from the losses inflicted by American Wolfpacks during 1944 and 1945. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, the Imperial Merchant Marine had been effectively eliminated as a factor in Japanese military operations. The empire that had conquered half the Pacific through superior naval coordination had been brought to its knees by American submarines that learned to hunt in packs. Today, the tactics pioneered by Blair's blasters and other American Wolfpacks are studied in naval academies around the world as examples of tactical innovation and adaptive warfare. The coordination procedures developed in Convoy College became the foundation for modern submarine doctrine and influenced naval operations far beyond submarine warfare. The 8 ships sunk in a single night of coordinated attacks represented more than a tactical success. They represented the triumph of American innovation, the effectiveness of coordinated operations, and the decisive impact that well-trained forces can achieve when they master the art of working together toward a common objective. In the waters off Luzon, on a night when 3 American submarines proved that cooperation could overcome any defense, Blair's blasters wrote the final chapter in the story of Japanese merchant shipping. The empire that had started the war with confidence in its naval superiority discovered that American submarines had learned to hunt with a coordination and effectiveness that no convoy could survive. The Japanese couldn't believe that one American wolf pack could sink 8 convoy ships in a single night. But the evidence lay scattered across the floor of the Pacific Ocean, testament to the devastating effectiveness of American submarines that had learned to hunt together, strike together, and win together in the greatest submarine campaign in naval history.